Bolaven, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Susana Suiswiki. Coming up.
It's one of the weaker ones in recent memory.
Typhoon Bolaven passes northern Marianas without damage. Also,
one of the reasons why Christianity has done so well in our region is because it talks about the importance of family and community.
how much are you willing to pay for a miracle? Religious movements in Fiji sparks public debate. And later, award-winning Kiwi Pasifika theatre show Upu returns. Typhoon Bolaven had just missed hitting any of the northern Mariana Islands last night, instead passing between Rota and Tinian. One person in Saipan has described it as a banana typhoon, meaning only banana trees were taken out by the high winds. Caleb Fotheringham has more.
Bolaven was upgraded to a Category 1 typhoon with sustained wind speeds of 130 km per hour just before passing the northern Mariana Islands. The strongest effects were felt at around 10 p.m. on Tuesday. Saipan Airport recorded wind speeds of just over 90 km per hour. 55 millimetres of rain was recorded over 12 hours, and the maximum wave height was close to 7 metres. With no island taking a direct hit from the eye wall, Paul Stanko, senior meteorologist at the US National Weather Service in Guam, says it was close to being the best-case scenario.
For having been hit by a tropical cyclone, it wasn't that bad, just because it didn't start really intensifying until after it got away from the Marianas. It's one of the weaker ones in recent memory.
The typhoon got closest to Rota. The island's mayor, Aubrey Hoko, says the winds were strong but people were prepared. She expects Rota to be back to normal, including having power restored in a couple of days.
Based on preliminary assessments, there are no major damages to our facilities and as well as to private property.
RNZ Pacific CNMI correspondent Mark Rufugees, who spent the night in Saipan, called Bolaven a banana typhoon, meaning only banana trees were blown over. But the typhoon did bring strong winds.
There's trees moving in different directions because of the storm. It's quite eerie, it's quite quiet. The night was very dark, very starless night. And you could just hear nature at its strength, trying to, show its might.
Mr. Rufugees says people were feeling worried before Bolaven entered the CNMI because of past large typhoons. Government messages ask people to look after their mental health.
So we're really happy, we're really fortunate that we dodged this one.
As it moves away from the CNMI, Bolaven has now strengthened to a Category 3 typhoon. It is heading into open waters.
Refugee Action Coalition says refugees abandoned by Australia and Papua New Guinea are experiencing another round of distress. Ian Rintoul says refugees in Port Moresby haven't been paid their food allowance, on top of being threatened with eviction and no access to health services. Mr. Rintoul told Lydia Lewis there's a real risk. Vulnerable refugees will be booted on the streets with no support.
People haven't been paid their food or income allowances, so it looks like the same. We've had this situation periodically over the last few months, but the Nomura is the company that is responsible for paying the food allowances and their income allowances, and that just hasn't happened this week. So there's another round of distress, particularly coming on top of the threats over the last few weeks, threats of eviction, and the fact that things like electricity and gas and Wi-Fi have been progressively being cut off in their accommodation. So nothing's resolved. It does the secret deal between the Australian government and the PNG government. It does look like the money has run out, and it's the squeeze is being put on the people who are most vulnerable.
Can you tell me more about that deal and why you are saying that it looks like the money has run out? Do you have any more indication as to what's happening and why?
Well, we don't know the terms of the secret deal. That's one of the problems that there have been now as a result of the exposés of the fact that services have been cut off and that invoices from refugee service providers have not been paid. The Chief Migration Officer in PNG actually came out and said that the Australian government has not been providing the money under the agreement. As since last night, the Australian government actually admitted that the last payment it made, was in July 2022. So that's more than a year ago before the Australian government had topped up, any money, according to on their own admission now, and that went rather further than what we've been able to get information previously. But it's very obvious that the money has run out because there is now, you've got service providers that are owed millions of dollars. The medical service provider PIH in Port Moresby has told the guys that they are now cutting services, and they expect they may even cut total services, particularly mental health services. Look like they're being cut totally, by the end of the year. That they're owed millions of dollars.
What is a realistic outcome that could immediately alleviate pressure for the providers and also those stranded?
Well, the immediate thing that could be done is for the Australian government to bring them to Australia. We know that could be done. It could be done overnight. There's only 62 people left in PNG. It wouldn't be a big issue at all for the Australian government to decide to bring them back to Australia. Papua New Guinea now is actually threatening to terminate their humanitarian program, as they call it.
What would happen then to the refugees? Do they not have rights to certain support and measures?
No, they've got no rights at all. It's an extraordinary situation. It's very, very akin to kind of official people trafficking, in my opinion. The fact that you can have people who have been determined to be refugees that have been owed international protection, and yet the Australian and Papua New Guinea can simply decide, where they're going to be shoved to. Whether they've got at the moment they've got no right to reside in Papua New Guinea. That's determined totally.
Where would they be shoved to? I mean, if nothing happens here, if Australia doesn't bring them to Australia or doesn't pay up, what would happen?
They'd be shoved onto the street. I think that's what you've got refugees now in Port Moresby who live with their bags packed in case they are, suddenly evicted. There's already, one guy who's living in a car in Port Moresby. So that's been the problem right from the beginning.
Can you just explain how severe the mental distress is? I mean, I've heard from someone else of one person who can't even do anything themselves, can't even make phone calls, and is just lying down all day. So can you just explain your understanding of the severity of their health?
It's difficult to describe. It's distressing to describe. But there's more than one person that's got, the withdrawal syndrome that we've seen in other detention centres run by Australia, and particularly from Nauru, which resulted in many people, including children, being brought from Nauru to Australia because they suffered that withdrawal syndrome.
What is withdrawal syndrome?
It's the person you described, people who won't come out of their room, who won't eat, who are incapable of making phone calls or answering phone calls sensibly, who simply withdraw from engaging with anybody. There's more than one of those people in Papua New Guinea who don't come out of their rooms, who rely on other people in their housing blocks to get their food, to bring them the food. For example, you've got other people with very distressing. This one guy who was 6 months in PIH, the hospital I mentioned before. They were then discharged from the hospital, but within a few days you had the same problems of people talking gibberish, looking like they were kind of hallucinating and able to engage with the people.
You've mentioned now that these health services and mental health services will be plucked away from these people.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's already been problems with that at the level of at which PIH has been willing to service the refugees. It seems because the funds have dried up and they've not been willing to actually provide the services that they had in the past. The offshore detention, the use of Nauru and Papua New Guinea was always a convenience for a very well-developed government, to push onto countries that were compliant because the Australian government effectively bribed them. The only alternative is to end the offshore detention arrangements and to bring the people in Papua New Guinea to Australia, where they can get the medical services, where they can have end the uncertainty that surrounds their situation in Papua New Guinea, where they can stay safe and secure, and if they want to go to a third country from Australia, they can. But it's quite clear that they've got no secure future in Papua New Guinea.
In a statement, an Australia Department of Home Affairs spokesperson says PNG took over the exclusive independent management of individuals remaining in PNG in December 2021. Australia paid PNG a one-off finite funding, with all payments made to PNG in the 2021 to 2022 financial year. Over the last few months, there's been much public debate on Fiji's coconut wireless concerning religion. The extradition of 5 members from the Grace Road Church, a Korean denomination accused of being a violent cult, sparked debate about the freedom of religion in Fiji. There's also been recent backlash involving an American preacher, Lily Java, who's allegedly collecting money from Fijians in return for performing miracles. Fiji's government has had to comment on both controversies. Whina Whanua spoke with Fijian Professor Georgie Ravulo from the University of Sydney about spirituality in Fiji and why these events have gained public attention.
Recently, Fiji's Deputy Prime Minister Manoa Kamikamica was questioned about what Fiji police were going to do about a certain American preacher who is allegedly collecting money from people in return for performing miracles. You also have the Korean Grace Road Church. It's been called a violent cult. And you have this public backlash. Do you think there's a conversation in Fiji about freedom of religion?
Yeah, I think people are more willing now to have critical conversations about these particular topic areas. In the past, people would take on church and faith as part of what they did in family and community. As Pacific people, religion, spirituality, faith have been a big part of our cultural practices and expression. What's interesting now is that young people who are part of such faith communities are having those critical conversations. This is then also leading to critical conversations with other people in the family about the role of spirituality and faith and whether those particular practices reflect our traditional views of spirituality and faith. So I think that's what's happening at the moment is there are those critical conversations that are creating more of a nuanced understanding of the role of church and faith and how that is being played out across the community.
Could you describe how important religion is to the Itauke or how influential it is in the Itauke community?
Christianity for Itauke has always been part and parcel of what we do as a community, as a family. People will go to church because it's what you do as a family. Young people will go along because it's part of what you do. I think it's been part of who we are as a community, and you see that played out in different realms of our lives, not just in the private but also in the professional. And I think that one of the reasons why Christianity has done so well in our region is because it talks about the importance of family and community, and that resonates with our traditional ways of knowing and doing, being and becoming. So I think that's why faith has played a big part in a lot of Indigenous Pacific cultures and our current practices across the community.
What about in terms of politics? We've seen for example, the evangelical churches becoming more and more influential in politics across the Pacific Islands?
Definitely. Yes. I think that we're seeing more of an influence from the evangelical Christian church. There's been more of the conservative views and values that have come from such movements. And I think there have been various pros and cons. There's different impacts as a result of having such politics and such views permeate our politics. The interesting things that are coming through is around whether people are given the flexibility and freedom to have the choice to have their own faiths and expressions outside of the norm of the evangelical perspectives. And I know that Fiji is quite a diverse population, ethnically and spiritually. You've got the Indo-Fijian population that will also practice diverse faiths. And so it's important that if we are going to be a multicultural community with multi-faiths and multi-perspectives, that they need to be included as well, not just one particular way of looking at things.
Do you think this is intimidating or this kind of causes problems for society?
When individuals who already feel like they're outsiders sit within a society that say that there's only one way of doing things in life, you continue to create levels of exclusion and isolation. Inclusive societies provide scope for diverse perspectives, views, values, practices, ways of doing things to be meaningfully included in different spaces and places. By saying that there is only one religion or one faith, then it does promote exclusion. So we do need to be mindful about creating policies and systems and structures in society that privilege one particular way of doing something over something else. And so as a result of that, we need to be more mindful and intentional about our approach to diversity.
The positive influences of the church, because a lot of Pacific Islanders talk about how it's, and you touched on this before, how it's played an integral part of the community, but it's also played a part in the development of states. Is that correct?
The church has played a big part in creating what we call the welfare state, or the response to social and welfare needs in our society. And I think you can't negate or you can't discount such civil society movements from places like the church and other religious bodies. So definitely they continue to play a big part in our societies across the islands. It's just important, though, that we need to ensure that the intention behind those areas of development is still inclusive of Pacific Indigenous views and values. When development occurs, generally we think of development from a Western point of view, and I think that could be detrimental to our development as Pacific Indigenous people when we are implementing development strategies and structures that they are inclusive of diverse perspectives, including our Indigenous perspectives and how we do what we do across the Pacific.
Following critical acclaim as a major new production for Silo Theatre in the 2020 Auckland International Arts Festival and a sellout season in Wellington at the Kiamo Arts Festival in June 2021, the groundbreaking Pasifika theatre show, Upu, returned and is being performed around New Zealand. Upu celebrates Pasifika writers and poets, one of them being award-winning Fijian poet Darren Kamali, who joins me on Pacific Waves. Bula Darren, tell me more about Upu. I understand you're one of the 28 poets that's being featured.
Yes, Upu is featuring two of my works from my Ulumati project, which is the Sacredness of Human Hair. It's a Fijian legacy project, so they've chosen two of my poems from the collection to feature in the show. And I think this is probably the second or third season of it on tour at the moment, so it's awesome to have my poems in those shows.
Yeah, this isn't the first time that your poems have been used in the production now, is it?
No, yeah, it's been a couple of times now, I guess, since they started. Probably, when did they start? 2019 or something like that, I think. And it's been featuring in their show, which is great.
Cool. And what's different this time around?
I don't know. It's probably the cast, depending on the cast of the Upu show, and depending on how they deliver the poems. The poems are still the same, still stagnant on the paper, but yeah, they really do bring it to life when they bring their shows to town. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, just moving away from the show for a bit. I mean, you dedicate your life to the creative arts. Gosh, you're an award-winning poet and writer. I mean, how did you get into poetry? Was it something you always wanted to do growing up in Fiji?
Not really. Growing up in Fiji, we never really did write poetry, or probably did something at school, but I wasn't as sort of interested in poetry in Fiji. So 17, when I came to New Zealand, I was 17, and I sort of poetry found me on the streets of Auckland when I started busking in 1998. So I've been doing it for about 25 years now, yeah.
Cool. And so from your experience, how was poetry and performance a tool for positive social change?
Yeah, this sort of, it actually helped me. Just like I said, I started busking on the streets. I started a community course under the TOPS training opportunity programs for, I think it was WINS at the time. So they had this thing for community and social work, but we had to undergo performance and performance art and art therapy. So which pretty much meant to write poems and also do some art. And it was part of a therapy group, and then also went out into the streets and shared that with on the streets of the CBD in Auckland, and also with the schools, and that's how I slowly started developing my poetry, and it actually developed into more music as well. So I recorded my first album in 2000, all written in poetry form and rearranged and composed into music. The music was done by Lee Baker, and I done my first album in 2000, and then my second album in 2005, and that was supported by Creative New Zealand, and I just kept writing. Yeah.
What do you love most about writing?
I just love telling my stories, especially coming from the islands, telling the stories about the islands and the city, my experiences, and also the old and the new, trying to combine contemporary and heritage art forms together, especially with the language and culture. And trying to be more, not just Fijian, but more pan-Pacific in my approach in my writings and the way I deliver my performances and stuff like that, as well as the multidisciplinary arts that I practice on the side. Yeah.
And what are the challenges that you've encountered as a poet?
I would say, sometimes it wasn't easy when I first started, because I'm actually a shy guy as well. I had to get out of my garage, get out of my bedroom, and take it out to the public as well. So I started submitting my writings to anthologies, so different anthologies, and then that's how I slowly got to publishing my own book, and also working with the South Auckland Poets Collective, which I co-founded with Ramon Ryan and Grace Taylor back in 2008. So, pretty much, the last 20 years of poetry.
Cool. So just coming back to Upu, you've mentioned that two of your poems are going to be in the show. Are you able to read out one of them, please?
Oh, okay. So this one was, I think this is How Do I Decolonize Myself? So, just trying to play around with the DK as well. So colonize is with a K. And people call me DK, so I just thought I'd write a poem about how do I decolonize myself. And it goes, I decolonize myself by growing my dreads. I decolonize myself by cutting my hair. I decolonize myself by making a uludavu wig. I decolonize myself by wearing a uludavu wig. I decolonize myself when I wear a mata wulo mask. I decolonize myself when I walk through the old coral plantation. I decolonize myself when I kaila. Chee-hoo-hoo! I decolonize myself when I sweat and cry salt. I decolonize myself to the white tree Atea, the saltwater well. I decolonize.
That's Pacific Ways for today. To listen back, head over to rnzi.com/programs. We're also on Apple, Spotify and iHeartRadio podcasts. From myself and the RNZ Pacific team, Tō whāsoifua.